Good morning. You can be opening your Bibles to Romans chapter 12. Appreciate the warm welcome back from my trip in San Diego. It was a very encouraging trip. Got to reconnect with some people. Asher and Abigail were both born there. But Asher was able to come with me on this trip, and we were able to reconnect with a lot of old friends and remember good memories and create new memories. And so, but it's good to be home, good to be back with all of you. I've got a little bit of a jet lag. Right now, Hannah likes to sleep in the living room. That's where her pack and play is. She just likes that room for some reason. The dining room, I'm sorry, it's the dining room. And when I was putting her to bed last night, I sing a couple songs with her and then I pray with her. But Samantha was in the kitchen, which is not far from the dining room. And when I walked into the kitchen, Samantha said, I sure am glad that God understands what we say to him when we pray. And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, the whole time you were praying for Abigail and not Hannah. And so maybe that's one of those examples of Romans 8, God understanding the groanings that we have to him. And God's like, I know what you mean. So I've got a little bit of a jet lag, but it's good to be back with all of you. I've missed you guys. I'm preaching both this morning and tonight, because I was gone last week, and next week I'm going to be in Nashville doing a meeting there. So, and then I think a lot of my traveling for the rest of the year is just going to be in October, but then it'll be done. So, during this last week, when we were in San Diego, I was reminded all the more of the human need for a sense of belonging and community. Just remembering the friendships that we have there, the friendships that we're making here, the relationships that we've had in Atlanta. We as human beings were designed to need to have community with other people, to be in a group of people that care for us and love us, which is, I think, becoming more and more elusive in our society, because all around us in our society, people will talk about self-care time or me time. Not that those kinds of things are inherently wrong, but if that's the only thing that you ever do, you're not becoming somebody that is loving towards other people. You're just kind of concerned about yourself. But if you're surrounded by people that are thinking that same way, that's one of the reasons why I wonder if in our society loneliness is such a problem. It's because we're being trained to look inward and not be as thoughtful about the needs of those around us. So on the one hand, we know that we need to be loved and we need community, but on the other hand, our society is not really instilling that quality in us that would create that kind of environment. One of the things that Christianity, though, offers are the resources to give people that sense of belonging and community and to be loved and things like that. And as we continue this series on Romans chapter 12, we're going to be looking at the part in Romans chapter 12, verse 13, that says to seek to show hospitality. That God in his instructions has told us to do things proactively, that when I'm engaged in that activity, I'm becoming somebody that helps other people not feel lonely. And as we've done in every one of these lessons, I want to remind us that everything that is said from Romans chapter 12, verse 3 through 21, and really the rest of the book, all blossoms or all that blossoms from this here in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, which says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. One of the things that I haven't emphasized from this text until now is all the times that you see the words you or your in this text, 5 times at least in the ESV translation, that it says over and over and over again that you need to be concerned with this. The purpose of this series of lessons, and if this is the first time that you're here, you're jumping into the middle of a series that we're looking at once a month, all based on Romans chapter 12. The goal of these lessons is not for you to look at somebody else and go, well, you need to be doing that. No, the goal of it is for you to look at yourself and ask yourself, am I becoming a living sacrifice? Am I doing the things that God said would be required if I'm going to be somebody who offers up my life to Him? And in this lesson, we're looking at the command to be hospitable. The other part of verse 13, though, says contribute to the needs of the saints. We looked at that, I think it was in May when we talked about brotherly affection. So I'm just going to focus on the part that talks about hospitality. But here's the schedule of what we've been looking at, what we're looking at today, Lord willing, what we'll look at in the coming months. I can't believe how quickly this year has been going by. But we've talked about finding and using your gift, that every one of us is gifted in some way that's unique to you, that needs to be used for God's purposes. And the next evangelism workshop that we're going to be doing, we'll be talking about how some of your gifts can be used specifically in that regard. We've talked about letting your love be genuine, that we show acts of love to other people, not for ulterior motives, but because we genuinely care about other people. We've talked about abhorring evil, learning to detest or to hate things that are wicked, and to have more of an affection towards the things that are good. One of those being our brothers and sisters in Christ, to have brotherly affection. Last couple times we talked about not being slothful but fervent, and rejoicing in hope, being patient in tribulation. In the midst of the tribulation that this audience would have been going through, one of the things that would build bonds with fellow Christians would have been this discipline of hospitality. And I want to go ahead and read Romans chapter 12, verses 9 through 13. And we're just going to focus in on verse 13, though, on just one part of verse 13. Let love be genuine, abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer, contribute to the needs of the saints, and seek to show hospitality. If somebody was to ask you, what is hospitality? How would you answer that? And by the way, if you tried to look up if you did a Google search, which I don't really use Google anymore, if you've never heard of the Brave browser, they're not paying me to say this, but the Brave browser takes all ads out of everything. You should get the Brave browser. It's got a cool lion on it, just so you know. So if you do a Brave browser search, or Google, for hospitality, what you'd find is that the common way that our culture understands hospitality is they think about it as an industry. The hospitality industry is made up of those who work in the hotels and those who work in restaurants. And you can go have hospitality given to you by going to some restaurant where there's going to be some cook that you never meet that makes your food, and then the waiter person is going to bring it out to you. Or you can go to some hotel that's got some nice amenities. You can go on a cruise line. You can go to a website called hospitalitynet.org that gives you articles about the latest happenings in the hospitality industry. But this is how our culture thinks about this. You can get degrees in the hospitality industry and work at 5-star hotels and all of that sort of thing. But in our culture, we think about it as something that you either pay money into to receive services, or it's something that is part of your business, and this is how you make money. And when the Bible talks about seeking hospitality, it's not saying for us to go seek out nice hotels or seek out cruise lines. It's not wrong to go do those things. That's not my point. But the Bible means something very different from the way that our culture would talk about it. In the Greek word that's used here in Romans chapter 12, verse 13, there's actually two Greek words that's used in the New Testament for hospitality. And the two words are Philonexia and Philoxenos. And the word that's used in Romans chapter 12, verse 13 is the first one here, Philonexia. And I want to say a couple things about these words. But together, both of these words appear as in total 5 times in the New Testament. That first word is used 2 times. The second word is used 3 times. But you notice how the word begins, philo. you remember when we looked a couple months back at the lesson on brotherly love in Romans chapter 12, verse 10, or brotherly affection? And the Greek word there was Philadelphia. It starts with a similar kind of idea, phila or philo, meaning like fond of. So Philadelphia is fond of the brothers. What's being commanded here is something different but connected. Philonexia, philoxenos. What does this mean? The idea of xenos or nexia, without getting into all the details of it, it means something like strangers. The word nexia means something like a lodging place for strangers. Xenos means strangers. Have you ever heard the term xenophobia before? Xenophobia is a fear of people that are different than you. And this is commanding the exact opposite thing. Philadelphia is love for brethren, but philonexos or philoxenia is love for people that look different than you, they talk differently than you, they come from a different kind of culture than you do. And just think about how you're doing with this. I don't know if you've ever struggled with this before, but you might have a very narrow window of the kind of people you're willing to reach out to. Where the person that you want to get to know, maybe they're a stranger right now, but it's really limited to people that are around my same age. It's limited to the people that like the same music that I like the same kind of food that I like. And as long as we already have some of those kinds of similarities, then it'll be worth getting to know those kinds of people. And if that's the attitude that I have, I'm not somebody who's hospitable. Hospitality is, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter what your skin color is, it doesn't matter how rich or poor you are, none of those kinds of metrics matter, that God has commanded us to be people who love strangers. And one of the problems with strangers is that they can be strange until you get to know them. Strangers have different experiences than you do, they dress differently than you do. I'll never forget, before I ever met Samantha, there was a Gothic girl that I was getting to know in college, and she wore she would cut herself and stuff, so she wore clothes that hid all of her cut marks and stuff. And we were getting to know each other and talking quite a bit. And there was one time when she wanted to come to church with me, and she said, well, how should I dress? Do people care about that sort of thing? And I said, don't worry about it. And she showed up in a really baggy sweatshirt of Nightmare Before Christmas, and all of her black Gothic kind of stuff. And the whole time she was sitting next to me, she just looked really, really, really uncomfortable. But after services were over, guess what the people in the suits and ties and the nice attire and the people that were wearing jeans, guess what everybody did? They come up and said, hey, nice to meet you, glad that you could be with us today. Nobody looked at somebody like that and thought, well, I don't know that I really want to talk to her because she looks strange. How are you doing with that kind of thing? Are there certain kinds of things that you see in other people that make you go, I don't really want to talk to that person, I don't want to get to know that person, there's something about them that just makes me not want to really ever engage in dialogue with them? Hospitality means that I'm willing to have people who are different than me in my home and in my life. And I understand that there's caution in this. You don't want to have people that are going to hurt your family into your home and that sort of thing. We got to be smart about those kinds of things, but I don't want to give all those cautions right now. That's the essence of what this idea is, though. I want to bring up a couple of misconceptions of hospitality to help us further define what this is. There's a few ways that people might think of hospitality that are not totally biblical, and here's one of them, that hospitality can always be with my best friends. You might think that you're being a hospitable person if you're always having your best friends into your home and into your life. Do you see that by definition that can't be hospitality? Now, it might be a form of hospitality because you are entertaining people and all that sort of thing. But if the only people that you ever entertain are already the people that you really know or people that are part of your family already, it's not really fully hospitality. It's great that you have people that are familiar over into your home. That's fine to do that sort of thing. But it might not be biblical hospitality if you're just limited to a narrow range of people that you already know. Here's another misconception of hospitality, is that it needs to impress other people. I don't know if we can have other people over because it's going to take a lot of work to get all the right stuff together, and it's got to really make people impressed with the work that we've done and stuff like this. I read a book not too long ago by a guy named Gregory Coles. I forgot what the book, No Longer Strangers, is actually the title of the book. And in part of the book where he's talking about hospitality, he says this: hospitality doesn't wait for perfection. It doesn't demand that the kids be incarcerated in their bedrooms and the floors purged of princess paraphernalia. Hospitality welcomes us into life as it is, on tidy days and chaotic ones alike, offering the food that's there without worrying whether it's a gourmet feast. Hospitality is simple, familiar, ordinary. Hospitality risks being unimpressive in order to be present. Now, if you want to have people over into your home and you want to make it really fancy, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And I remember when Samantha and I first moved to Nashville and people would have us over and we experienced Southern hospitality for the first time, and it was really intimidating. Because people would have us into their home and they had really nice dishes and really nice cups and everything like looked really good. And we were like, okay, so we came from a culture where people didn't really do that sort of thing. So if we have to have people over, which we want to do we have to try to imitate that? And then we went to California where people had too small of houses to have big tables. And so everybody just ate around the couches. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we can do that too. If you're going to have people over, do you have to use really nice plates, or could you use paper plates? Raise your hand if somebody invited you over into their home and they used paper plates. Raise your hand if you would be offended by that. Okay, we're good. All right, so you see that hospitality, the goal of it is not to impress other people. It's to be present in the lives of people as you're getting to know them. Here's another misconception, is that hospitality is only an action. In other words, if I have people into my home or I get together with somebody in some capacity that I don't know very well, as long as I went through the action of it, then I was being hospitable. Well, hospitality is an attitude before it ever becomes an action. You can go through the action of something that looks hospitable, but not have a hospitable spirit about you. One example of this would be Proverbs 23, verses 6 and 7. Do not eat the bread of a man who is stingy. Do not desire his delicacies, for he is one who is inwardly calculating. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. You got somebody here that the only thing they can think about is, okay, well, they ordered that and it's going to cost this much, or I can't believe how much this tri-tip actually cost, and they're just going to chow the whole thing down. But when they talk to you, they smile and go, oh, I hope you enjoy it. Hope it's really good. If you ever have that kind of attitude when you're engaging in hospitality, do you see that that's not being hospitable? If the only thing you can think about are your losses and not the gains of the relationship, you don't have the attitude of hospitality. Here's a fourth misconception. Hospitality can only be done in the home. Hospitality, obviously, is something that can be done in the home, and oftentimes is. But let's say that you're a college student and you live in a dorm room, and you're listening to this sermon right now where you're being told that you better be hospitable, and you go, okay, well, this doesn't apply to me. Or you've got some kind of family dynamic where somebody in the family is very much against Christians and Christians ever coming over and that sort of thing. And so you're kind of stuck, and I guess you just can't be hospitable. That's not the case. When we understand that hospitality is a fondness or a love of strangers, could you meet somebody for the first time, and rather than inviting them into your home, you invite them to go get coffee, or you invite them to go get lunch somewhere, something like that. You're inviting them into your life. Do you see what biblical hospitality is? It's with people you're not super familiar with. It's really caring about getting to know them. It's not being afraid of these people. It's having a wider window of the kinds of people that you're willing to reach out to. All right, so if that's what it is, why does this matter so much? Why does it matter that we as Christians figure out how to do this and become more and more hospitable? And maybe the most obvious reason would be that God has commanded us to do this, and if we love God, then we're going to seek to do this, and we really shouldn't need other reasons beyond just God commanding us. But if we were going to think about other reasons why this is important, what would they be? I think one reason is that this is really important for evangelism. I just saw, and since being here, a lot of you have commented to me that Bowling Green is the fastest growing part of Kentucky, that there's a lot of people moving in here right now. I saw on a list a couple days ago that Bowling Green made number 88 out of 100 most desirable places to live in the country right now. It was on some list of the top 100 places to live, and it made number 88, and I want to have a word with those 87 other places, whatever they were. But there's a lot of people that are moving in here. And added to that, in our society, one of the problems in our culture right now is loneliness. Forbes Health had an article a couple weeks ago that was dealing with loneliness, and it said if you're currently experiencing feelings of loneliness, you aren't alone. In fact, a 2020 study by Cigna found that 61% of Americans reported being lonely in 2019, up from 54% in 2018. Now, 54% is already a lot, and then it jumped up even more from there. What is loneliness? Loneliness, you can feel lonely in a big city. You can feel lonely when you're surrounded by a lot of people. Being lonely means that even though I'm around other people, I don't feel like anybody really cares for me. And as more and more people move to Bowling Green, do you think that a lot of these people that have left this other place wherever they lived and they've come here, do you suppose that they're craving some kind of sense of community because they feel lonely? I brought this up before, and I feel like I need to bring it up several more times, that if you start to see driver's license plates from other states like California or like New Jersey or some of these places that maybe don't have the best reputation in this part of the country, as you see more and more people moving in from areas like that, what's your attitude towards them? One person that I talked to who had a friend who moved to the South from California, the friend told him this: in the South, you're a stranger for 5 minutes, but you're a newcomer for 50 years. I have not experienced that here, but there's other parts of the South where I have experienced that. And that should not be the attitude that's propagated by God's people. That is, as more and more people move in, that we have the opportunities to get to know a lot more people. And think about this with hospitality. When we do hospitality, oftentimes it's with Christians, which is fine, and I'll say more about that in just a moment. But when was the last time you had a non-Christian into your home, or you had lunch or dinner with a non-Christian to try to get to know them better and help them get connected to the Lord? I'm reminded in Luke chapter 5 of when Luke records that Matthew started following Jesus, or Levi. Levi starts following Jesus, and then immediately Levi has a bunch of people into his home with Jesus. And it says in Luke chapter 5, verse 29, and Levi made him a great feast in his house, and there were a large company of tax collectors and others reclining at table with them. If you know non-Christians in this community, people who are not Jesus followers, could you take a couple families or one family from here and have them over into your home with those other people that you know in the community and have them start to get to know non-Christians? All right, so it matters for evangelism in that way, but connected to that, what about people who are new converts? If somebody becomes a Christian and they're not immediately met with people in the church saying, hey, do you want to get lunch? Do you want to get dinner? Do you want to come over sometime and hang out with us? Do you know how easily people will fall through the cracks if we're not reaching out to other folks? I remember as a new Christian, one of the things that meant so much to me, I had to drive 45 minutes to get to the church building every Sunday. And there were some families that said, look, we know that you're driving a long distance. If you need to just stay at our house between both services so you can come to both of them, just stay at our house the whole time and just hang out with us. Watch football, whatever you want to do. And some of those times were so formative for me because I got to see how Christian families interact, how Christian wives act towards their husband and Christian husbands act toward their wives, and some ideas about parenting, even though I wasn't even close to being a parent yet. Those things were very formative for me. So it matters for evangelism that we have this spirit of hospitality, but it also matters that for us to deepen our relationships with one another. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 13. Exhort one another every day as long as it is called today, that none of you may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. The Bible says this in so many different ways. There's so many one another commandments that we need one another to strengthen each other. We need one another to help conquer sin. We need one another so that our hearts can remain tender, so that they don't get hardened because of the deceitfulness of sin. Okay, I want to do this, and I want us to all look around the room. I want you to raise your hand if you've moved here in the last year. Who's moved here within the last year? Okay, look around. Do you see the amount of hands that are going up right now? Asher, your hand needs to go up too. Thanks, Asher. There's a lot of folks that have, okay, you can put them down now, thank you. There's a lot of folks who have moved here within the last year. And one of the things that can happen in a local church sometimes is that we who have been here for more than a year have already developed our friendships with other people. And so when other people move in, we don't have the bandwidth to reach out to new people and get to know new people. But if the Bible says that we need one another, and we look around the room and say, you know what, it's not just people in the community that are not Christians that are strangers. There's people in this room that are strangers to me. And I've not yet reached out to them. I've not yet gotten to know them. And it might even be the case that there's people here that have been here for years that you haven't gotten to know yet. And so we need hospitality for that, but there's another reason why hospitality matters. And that's because it can bring unexpected blessings even to you. And there's a passage, I think, that helps us with this in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unaware. Now, I don't think the point of this passage is to say, if you have people into your homes, you might find that there's some celestial angels that look like terrestrial human beings that enter your house, and you have this really crazy experience. I think what the writer of Hebrews is doing is referencing the stories of Abraham and Lot and how they entertained strangers or angels that ended up being stranger angels, something like that. They did that, and do you remember the two that came to Lot's house? How those angels became the source of salvation to Lot. That there were unexpected blessings that came to Lot because he was willing to have these people into his home. Now, have you ever had a time before where you engaged in hospitality and you found that you thought you were the one that was going to bless everybody else, but you ended up being blessed in ways that you didn't expect? I think about in 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 8, when Elisha and the Shunammite lady, look what happens in chapter 4, verse 8. One day Elisha went on to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged him to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And as the story goes on, they actually expand their house and make a guest room for Elisha. And he stays there from time to time. They give him a lamp and a bed and all that stuff. And there's one day when this Shunammite lady, her son has like a heat stroke or something. I don't know exactly what it was, but he falls over and he dies working out in the field. And because Elisha has familiarity with these people, he's able to raise this kid from the dead. When we lived in Atlanta, one of the things that Sewell Hall's daughter, Cherry Trimble, one of the best Bible students I've ever known, she said that one of her best memories growing up is whenever there was a visiting preacher, and or just in general, whenever they would have people into their homes, is that Sewell and Kenita would have all the kids sit around the table with them, and they would have whoever was the guest eating at the table with them, and the conversations that they all had with the visiting preachers ended up bringing unexpected blessings even to Sewell's kids. Now, if this woman, who's hospitable in 2 Kings chapter 4, is doing all this good deeds, it ends up blessing her child by raising him back from the dead. Think about what hospitality can do for your family. The blessings of the conversations, the blessings of the deeper relationships that can be made. That's one way that it can bless you. But notice another story, another quick story. In Acts chapter 28, when Paul shipwrecks to Rome, but he does the stay over at Malta first, the island there. It says in Acts chapter 28, verse 2, and then verses 8 and 9, The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and it was cold. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery, and Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. Now notice what happens. This ship filled with some people that were criminals crashes to your island. And the weather's not very good, and these people show unusual kindness to all these folks. By the way, are there people that have come to Bowling Green in really unexpected, tumultuous kinds of ways and situations? This is a refugee town. And there's people that have come from all kinds of cultures and different countries. And these people on this island, who it seems have not yet been exposed to Christianity, showed unusual kindness. Far be it from anybody in this room, if we ever say, why are people from such and such a country moving into this area? Why is it that people are bringing these ideas to this? We need to show unusual kindness. And notice that when they do this, they end up being blessed, because there's people on this island that are sick, they've got diseases, and they're being cured by the people that they showed hospitality towards. I can't tell you how many times I've interacted with people that are from a totally different culture, and we did a good deed by having them into our home, and then they ended up expanding my understanding of the world because of the good conversations that we had. They healed certain things about me that needed to be healed. Hospitality matters for evangelism, and it matters because we need relationships with one another, and it matters because you can end up being blessed in ways that you'd never expect. But just really briefly, last point. How do we overcome some barriers to doing this? There's a few barriers that you might think of on why we don't engage in this like we ought to. And one reason is because hospitality requires intentionality. If you look at your backyard and you see all the weeds that are in your backyard, do you know why those weeds grew up? Because you weren't intentional about getting rid of them. And I guess even if you are intentional, they still come, so whatever. It's just kind of like a loss. The only kind of thing that grows when you're unintentional are thorns and thistles. The things that do grow when you're intentional are fruits and nice things that you can consume and stuff. In like manner, if you want to bear fruit for the Lord, the only way it's going to happen is by intentionality. But this text says to seek to show hospitality. It's something that we've got to seek out. And I think seeking implies regularity. I can't look back to that time 3 months ago when I had a couple families over and go, yeah, I think I am pretty hospitable. Seeking it means that this is something that's regularly part of my life. But it also implies that there's planning. Okay, I think the church directory is useful for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons that it can be useful is to go through it and pray for all the members. Another reason that it can be helpful is to go through it and go, okay, have I gotten to know this person yet? Have we had them into our homes? Have I had lunch or dinner with any of these people? It's useful so that you can start to check off and start to get to know people and develop those kinds of relationships. So let me just ask it this way. What are your concrete current plans for hospitality? And if you don't have any, this is an opportunity to start thinking in that direction. But if you're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen by accident. Here's another barrier to hospitality, is that it can be taxing. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 9, show hospitality to one another without grumbling. What are the kinds of things people grumble and complain about? Clint talked about the traffic this morning in class, and I was thinking, Clint, you've never been to Atlanta, or at least if you've been to Atlanta, you've never lived there for 3 years. The traffic here is nothing. I mean, Scottsville gets kind of bad at times, and I can understand it. But Atlanta, I was like, whoa, man, my patience was tested so much living there. I complained about the traffic quite a bit. People can complain about the government, the weather, whatever. You know what's added to that category of the kinds of things people can complain about is hospitality. Do you understand the temptation to grumble about hospitality? Have you ever grumbled about it before? And let me say it this way, and I'm going to be blunt about this. If you've never complained about hospitality, there's two possibilities on why you've never complained about it. Number one, because you've just got such a godly attitude and you just don't ever struggle with complaining. Or the second option is because you don't ever do hospitality, so you don't understand why it would be a cause of complaining. So which is it for you? What are some reasons why hospitality can cause grumbling or complaining? Here's one of them, is the cost. Biblical hospitality is not something that you financially gain from. It's not something that you're making money on. In fact, it's something that you're sacrificing to have people into your home, into your life. And so because of that, the cost of groceries going up, all those sort of things, that can be a cause of complaint. Here's another one, is the response. I invited like 6,000 people into my home and only 4 of them showed up. And so that can be kind of discouraging when that sort of thing happens. Don't complain about it. Be thankful for the ones that came. Or here's another one, the energy that it takes to clean the plates. And that's why we use paper plates, is you just throw them away and we're done with it. It takes a lot of energy to do all the cleanup and stuff like that. And like, oh man, we're doing this again and all that sort of thing. Yeah, don't do it with complaining though. Do this joyfully that you've got a house or the finances to be able to do something like this. And there's probably a lot more that we could say about all of that. But do you see that all of this is part of being a living sacrifice? If I'm going to lay my life down for other people, one of the things that's required for that to happen is that I'm opening up my heart and my life and my home to other people so that we can develop those kinds of relationships to strengthen each other. What gives us the power to do this? I think Leviticus 19, one of the most applicable, there's so many applications that come out of Leviticus 19. But look what God said way back in the Old Testament in Leviticus 19, 33 and 34. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Even in the Old Testament, God says, you guys were strangers in Egypt. I brought you out of that place. So when other strangers come to your land, well, what if they're pagans? Yep. You still show them kindness because you need to remember that you used to be a stranger in Egypt and God brought you out of there. And if that's true for the Israelites, how much more true is that for us? If hospitality is loving strangers, how much of a stranger were every one of us to God? We were pretty strange to him, estranged, different from him. And he, in his good grace and his good mercy, brought us into a covenant with him and has shown us hospitality by promising a home with him forever. And the more and more we understand that, the more and more we'll be able to pay it forward and give it to other people in the name of God who did it for us first. We're about to sing a song, Have Thine Own Way, Lord. And if there's anybody here this morning that needs to have God have more control over your life and the way that you dictate even your social relations, like we've talked about this morning, this is an opportunity to get your life right with God. If there's anything that we can do for you, please come forward while we stand, while we sing.